So how does someone completely reinvent themselves, not just once, but multiple times, and hit the absolute top in totally different fields? I mean, think about it, going from the world's greatest bodybuilder to the highest paid movie star on the planet, and then to the governor of California. Yeah, this is not a story about luck. It's not even just about hard work. This is a story about a system, a formula for literally writing your own destiny. Okay, let's get into it.
In 1968, a 21-year-old Arnold Schwarzenegger landed in Los Angeles with broken English and just $20 in his pocket. His most audacious move wasn't physical, it was the psychological realization that he could invent his own destiny. Just let that sink in for a second. He had next to nothing. He's in a new country, barely speaks the language, but in his head he had the one thing that mattered, a perfectly clear vision of who he was going to be. You know, while the rest of the world saw this penniless immigrant, he saw a future king. And this wasn't some vague daydream, it was a blueprint. It was a detailed plan for a future self that felt so real to him, the physical world just hadn't caught up yet.
And this is where it gets really interesting. He was already Mr. Universe at this point. I mean, literally, the best in the world at his craft. Now, for most of us, that's it. That's the peak. But for Arnold, that very identity, Mr. Universe, was actually a cage. It was the thing holding him back from his next, even bigger goal, becoming a global movie star. He knew that to get to that next level, he couldn't just get better at what he was doing. He had to systematically tear down and completely replace his current self. His past success, it was a trap, and he was not going to fall for it.
And that gets us to the core idea of this whole thing, identity shifting. Now, this is way more than just faking it till you make it. It's a deliberate, almost engineering-like process. It's about being the author, the architect, and the CEO of your own future. The key here is thinking of your current self not as the final product, but as a prototype, version 1.0, a version that's meant to be analyzed, debugged, upgraded, and eventually replaced by version 2.0, all based on a meticulously detailed plan. So where on earth did this rock-solid self-belief come from? This systematic way of thinking? Well, it wasn't born in some comfortable gym in sunny California. It was forged in the fire of a really tough youth, in a place and time that gave him every single reason to give up before he even started. And that defiance, born from all that struggle, became the engine for his entire life.
I mean, his upbringing was a real crucible. He grew up in post-war Austria, basically in poverty. That accent that we all know, well, back then, it was a source of constant ridicule. And his dream of being a bodybuilder, people didn't think it was inspiring. They thought it was weird and vain and just plain ridiculous. He was just surrounded by this chorus of people telling him, no, you can't do that, that's impossible. Every signal from the outside world screamed limitation. But all that resistance, it didn't break him. It just created this massive burning desire to escape and prove every single one of them wrong. Every no was just more fuel for the fire.
And that environment taught him a lesson that stuck with him forever. Some rules are just meant to be broken, especially the ones that get in the way of your vision. Get this, while he was doing his mandatory year in the Austrian army, he was told he couldn't leave to go compete in the Junior Mr. Europe competition. So what did he do? He snuck out, he went AWOL, he competed, he won, and then he came back and happily spent a week in military prison for it. See, this wasn't just some kid rebelling. This was an early, critical sign of his core belief. His future identity was way more important than his present obligations. He had a disciplined disrespect for any rule that didn't serve his blueprint. So, from all that struggle, he basically boiled it down to one fundamental truth. The real fight wasn't against poverty or his accent or all the doubters. The real fight was internal. He understood with crystal clarity that if he didn't have an ironclad belief system in his own head, that constant storm of skepticism from the outside world would eventually just wear him down. He had to build a mental fortress so strong that nothing, no insult, no rejection, no failure, could ever breach its walls.
And all of that brings us to the very heart of his operating system, the framework he used to turn that internal belief into real-world results across 3 different industries. We call it the Arnold Equation, and right now, we're going to break it down.
So let's define this thing. The Arnold Equation is the core belief that success isn't something you just wish for. It's something you execute. It's a process. It's not a single event. You start by admitting that your current self is just a draft, right? It's a prototype with bugs and limitations. Then, you design the final version in painstaking detail, and you just systematically, relentlessly work to close the gap between the two. The plan is everything, and the execution is absolutely non-negotiable.
The whole equation really stands on 3 powerful interconnected pillars. First, you've got his famous 6 steps to success, which is all about the tactical side of things. Second, the visualization and affirmation mandate, which is about programming your subconscious mind. And third, the most ruthless one of all, the anti-regret protocol, which is about creating an unbreakable commitment. You can think of them as your tactics, your mindset, and your fuel. Let's dig into each one.
So the first pillar is all about making the impossible feel possible. I mean, Arnold's goals were just massive. Be the greatest bodybuilder ever, be a Hollywood legend, govern a major state. To keep from being totally paralyzed by how huge his vision was, he broke everything down into a clear step-by-step process. It's about having that giant vision, but focusing like a laser on the very next manageable step. This turned the overwhelming idea of climbing Mount Everest into a simple daily checklist that just said, take the next step.
Okay, the second pillar is where the real mental engineering happens. This wasn't just thinking positive. It was a mandate. It was a non-negotiable part of his training. Arnold would spend hours every single day mentally rehearsing his success. He wouldn't just see himself winning Mr. Olympia, he would feel the weight of the trophy in his hands, hear the roar of the crowd, sense the heat of the lights on stage. He was firing the neural pathways for success in his brain so many times that when the actual moment came, it felt familiar. It felt inevitable. His body was just catching up to where his mind had already been 1,000 times.
And that brings us to the third and honestly, the most intense pillar, the anti-regret protocol. Arnold famously said, "I hate plan B." Why? Well, because having a safety net, having a backup plan, it subtly gives your brain permission not to go all in on plan A. It whispers, hey, it's okay if you don't fully commit, because there's a soft place to land. By systematically getting rid of his escape routes, he literally forced himself into a corner where the only way out was forward, through success. It created a high-stakes world where total commitment wasn't just a good idea, it was a survival mechanism.
Okay, so that's the philosophy. But a philosophy is pretty useless without a system to actually put it to work. So let's look at the daily, non-negotiable habits he used to turn that internal blueprint into a physical, undeniable reality.
This number right here, it says it all. 5 hours. That was his typical daily time-locked training session. And this wasn't just about building muscle. It was about building discipline. It was the physical proof of his mental commitment. These marathon sessions were totally uninterrupted and completely non-negotiable. They were the daily ritual that proved to himself and to everyone else that his ambition wasn't just talk. It was a painful daily down payment on his future self. But his strategy for managing time outside the gym was just as intense. He used something we call the goal stacking protocol. You know, conventional wisdom tells you to focus on one thing at a time, master one skill, then move on. Arnold did the exact opposite. While he was training for Mr. Olympia, he was also taking acting classes, English classes, and starting his first real estate and mail-order businesses. This forced a level of hyper-efficiency that's just hard to even imagine. Every single minute of his day had a job, creating this compounding effect of progress across multiple goals at the same time. He wasn't on one path. He was paving 3 highways at once. Now, his second key habit was just as important as all that physical training. He understood that you have to sell the vision, not just to yourself, but to the world. He used every single interview, every public appearance, as a stage for disciplined public affirmation. He was methodically programming the minds of everyone around him, producers, investors, the public, to see him not as he was, but as he was going to be.
He would just say things like this, "I will be the biggest movie star," with total certainty, long before it was even remotely true. When people laughed at his accent or his unpronounceable name, he didn't get defensive. He just stated his future as if it were a historical fact. This wasn't arrogance, it was strategy. By declaring his future identity out loud, he was making himself publicly accountable and solidifying that blueprint for everyone to see. He was literally speaking his future into existence.
So what happens when you apply this relentless formula, this identity shifting, this visualization, this systematic execution over an entire lifetime? Well, you don't just build a career, you build an empire of identities. You get to live 3 distinct, world-class lives, all in one.
And this timeline just shows the results of that formula in action. It is a legacy of identity. In the 60s and 70s, he authors The Bodybuilder, not just winning Mr. Universe 7 times, but literally changing the sport and dragging it into the mainstream. Then, in the 80s, he makes this seemingly impossible shift to The Movie Star. He overcame the accent, the name, everything to become the highest-paid action hero on the planet. And then, in the 2000s, the most audacious shift of all, The Politician, becoming the governor of California, the fifth largest economy in the world. This isn't just a great career. This is definitive proof that the formula works.
But his legacy goes way beyond his own achievements. The principles of the Arnold Equation are everywhere now. The whole idea of visualization is a staple in boardrooms and championship locker rooms. High achievers all over the world use goal stacking, whether they call it that or not, to manage their big ambitions. And the power of affirmation is a core part of the entire personal development industry. What he really proved is that your self-image, that blueprint you hold in your mind, is the single greatest competitive advantage you will ever have.
So, what does this all mean for you? The story of Arnold Schwarzenegger isn't just some incredible biography. It's an actionable guide. It is a powerful call to action to become the conscious, deliberate author of your own life story.
So here's the blueprint, straight from his life. First, author your ideal self with absolute clarity. Don't worry about what's realistic, think about what's possible. Then, consciously reject the limitations of who you are right now. Start thinking, talking, and acting from the perspective of your future self today. Make visualization and affirmation a daily, non-negotiable practice, just like brushing your teeth. If you do this consistently, you will build an internal certainty so powerful that your success becomes an absolute inevitability.
And that brings us to the final, and really the most important question. It's the same one Arnold asked himself when he showed up in America with 20 bucks in his pocket. It's the question at the very heart of all intentional growth. So take a second and really think about it. Who is the next version of yourself?
Arnold Schwarzenegger built his entire empire on one truth, that the mind is the ultimate blueprint. The Arnold Equation gave him a systematic guide for identity shifting across 3 completely different world-class careers. And it all boils down to one simple, immutable rule. Your greatest creation is always the next version of yourself.